No act of terrorism takes place in a vacuum, and the attacks in Paris are no exception. It's with this thought in mind that my next guest penned a column for Truthdig entitled A Message from the Dispossessed, in which he lays out what happened in France in the context of global events. Chris Hedges is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, former Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times, and joins me now to discuss Charlie Hebdo and the roots of radicalization. Chris, amazing to have you on. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start by asking you about the most recent piece you penned concerning the Paris attacks, in which you write the terrorist attack in France that took place at the satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo was not about free speech. It was not about radical Islam. It did not illustrate the fictitious class of civilizations. It was a harbinger of the emerging dystopia where the wretched of the earth, deprived of resources to survive, devoid of hope, brutally controlled, belittled and mocked by the privileged who live in the splendor of indolence in the industrial West, lash out in nihilistic fury. Chris, how was this attack about the global dispossessed?
Well, let's take the life of a young Muslim male in a refugee camp, for instance, in Gaza, where he's, of course, trapped. Gaza's a vast open-air prison run by the Israeli government, sleeping 10 to a floor. The water is rancid, so he has to walk blocks through the muddy alleys of the refugee camp to get drinkable water. Hunger and even malnourishment is rampant. He's lining up for food. There's no employment. He has no possibility of marriage. The only thing that holds together his life, living on $1 a day, if that, is that call to prayer 5 times a day. The only thing that gives him any kind of dignity or self-worth is his identity as a Muslim. And when we see privileged journalists or satirists, whatever, in the industrial North mocking that which is all these people have to hold on to, I think it illustrates the vast misunderstanding and divide that exists between the wealthy elite of the world and over half of the world's population that lives in misery. And I think you touched on it at the top of the show, the whole idea that there's any kind of parity in a country like France, and I lived in France, I lived in Paris. You can go to prison for a year if you are a Holocaust denier and pay a $60,000 fine. If you wear the niqab or the burqa publicly, that is the traditional headscarf, and the niqab is the veil that just has the eye slit. You are arrested. You have to pay a $200 fine and do community service. You're not allowed to wear a hijab, which is just a headscarf, into hospitals, government buildings. The Holocaust is taught in the French school system, and yet the War of Independence on the part of Algeria, the former French colony, where estimates are as high as 1.5 million Algerians died, horrible abuses and atrocities, is not taught at all. And so Muslims are told, and France is an extremely racist country. I mean, I've watched the French police pull North Africans off of the Paris metro and beat them on the platform. Constant identity checks, and they're trapped out in these ghettos, these banlieues, where they're kind of Stalinist housing projects, segregated from the rest, whether that's in Lyon or Marseille or anywhere else. So the message to Muslims is clear. Your history, your traditions, your culture don't matter. And I think the other issue that we want to raise is how those who grow up in these banlieues, in these impoverished housing projects, have had their identity stripped from them. The French do not consider them French, and when they go back to Algeria or Tunis or Morocco, where they may have been born and lived briefly, they're alien outcasts. And so they become prey for these radical groups that prey on their despair, their loss of identity. And that's no different from any kind of binary group, whether it's the Red Brigades or the old fascist or communist party. So it's not anything endemic to Islam or the Quran. It's a response that's bred out of dispossession, poverty, aimlessness, and despair. It has that veneer of radical Islam, but that's not the origin of what's happened.